Let's go. Welcome to another episode of the OoruLabs podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complained about how bad our cities are, how bad our commute is? You will get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability. So do not forget to like, subscribe, and share these videos. I am Satya Shankaran, and today we are going to be talking with Roshan Toshniwal. He has worked on studying urban mobility in many cities across the country for quite a while, and as a consultant at ENY, he has worked on bus procurement in cities like Pune. He also works at the Ola Mobility Institute and has a good background in understanding data, metrics, and the transportation scene in general. Welcome to the show, Roshan.
Thank you. Thank you, Satya, for having me.
Today, I want to start off with a question that was on my mind for quite a while. Are we measuring mobility right? What do you think?
I think before we begin with this question, let us understand the difference between transportation and mobility. Transportation is this physical act of moving people and goods, while mobility is that quality aspect of transportation services defined by time, cost, accessibility, level of accessibility, safety, and various such virtues that sort of is more brings in more humane approach to transportation. Now, when we look at mobility as such, we have this motherhood document in many cities, which is called Comprehensive Mobility Plan, which often does not capture many of these things, but were prepared more to facilitate the infrastructure, transportation related infrastructure, specifically, the modern day metro and mass transit. So in these cities, and the plan, it often doesn't coordinate with the overall master plan of the city, which is also not updated very often.
True.
As per the regulations, it needs to be done once in every 20 years. And in the recent past, there have been a lot of discussions around GIS based master plan, which is now being initiated in various cities. It needs to be, I mean, the comprehensive mobility plan needs to be synced with these master plan, so that we understand more granular mobility related data, and it informs, this data informs the overall mobility scenario for the city. In addition to that, we are so obsessed with the speed in cities, getting people to move more than people to move. I think vehicle to move. What's interesting about that is some indexes have come out in the past, which is, you may have heard of the congestion index that
Yeah.
measures speeds. And there are studies that highlights the various factors that impedes the speed, and it's often not due to anything but the capacity, and also the hurdles, such as, surface quality of the road, to various man-made obstructions. Yet our solutions are, to build wider roads, unkept roads, signal free corridors, flyovers, without really reflecting how we should move people more than moving vehicles. And
Yeah.
this is something that we need to reinstate in the process of creating a better mobility pattern in our cities. The other aspect that I think that have come in place is the service level benchmark that was created by MOUD way back in 2008. It has some other states which picked up urban mobility policy, like Maharashtra, has a draft urban mobility policy. So there are indicators that they've put in place, from weight and access time of public transport, to measuring what is the quantity of public transport and mass transit in the cities. But there are no specific regulation or specific method to build that accountability within the system, and prioritize this accountability so that cities can start getting that necessary infrastructure in place. So we try to encompass all these various mobility related issues, from road accident data to vehicular traffic at various junctions during the peak period, to how people move, the quality of public transport as such, and other externalities, with our index, which we call it OMI as ease of moving index. I had the fortune to launch in this index in on 25th of April. It measures mobility scenario in 40 cities across 9 different parameters, a good mix of primary and secondary data. And the parameters are also so worded that it looks at mobility goals that the city should aspire to attain. If you ask me in brief, what exactly are we measuring, and whether we are measuring mobility right, I think it's all happening everywhere, but it's not, there's no consolidation of that repository of data, and probably it doesn't inform each other. So decision making is sort of paralyzed in this process, and then we use our intuition to sort of decide a lot of these decisions.
The last statement really put it, like we are making gut decisions, and those gut decisions could be political, social, and based on demands that are raised on an ad hoc basis, and some amount of what has gone as experience into these agencies that say, okay, I think I know what I'm doing here and I know where it might be. It's not literally data driven or metric driven. And so you touched upon lots of things here that I want to deep dive
Sure.
into, right? One is the transportation and mobility. Transportation is what we see as the physical modes that we are going, and mobility is basically what you're saying is the qualitative parameters that says how people experience the transportation system and how it is serving the purpose it is supposed to serve in an integrated fashion. So when we say mobility and mobility metrics, we are talking about qualitative also along with the quantitative metrics. But here are the three four things that I wanted to go one
Sure.
after the other. Right, you talked about CMP, which are basically planning documents, right? And then you talked about service level benchmark, and some states having their own mobility policy with some amount of quantitative measures included in it. I need X number of services, I would do some X amount. This is how I want to measure the outcomes of these services. I want to deep dive into that before I get into the speed measure. That's a rant I want to go into with you. Tell me something. Are there metrics that allow people to plan today effect those comprehensive mobility plans that you see and the urban mobility plans? Do they collect the metrics and then make plans based on those? Are they, of course, if you're coming up with service level benchmark, there must be some amount of metrics available, but are they
Yes.
good enough? Are they deep enough? Are they integrated enough? Do you think they are there, or is it the other way around that the planning is driving the data collection? What do you think is the situation?
So yes, like we measured, we talked about the service level benchmarking sort of enables the city to sort of rate where they are on certain aspects, but I don't think it is very holistic.
Mm,
None of the CMP sort of says that this is the bearing capacity of vehicle load that the cities can take. It still harps on a lot of large infrastructure projects, not necessarily public transport, but like saying, okay, you need grade separators in various locations. And again, like I said, it is not probably integrated with master plan, which itself gets upgraded once in 20 years. You
mm,
also notice in many of our cities there is a lot of ad hoc planning. So
mm,
when I say ad hoc, it so happens suddenly they decide, oh, I want to build a steel bridge here, or I want to
mm,
build a flyover there, and then without really realizing how it's going to impact, we often say that flyover only pushes the congestion from one point to another, one junction to another, and it's only being built to facilitate movement of vehicle. Now what we need to, and often CMP harps on this subject, that you have to move people, but what are you doing about it? Time and time again we keep saying, there is a lacuna in terms of the first mile, last mile connectivity, which is why
mm,
probably people don't pick it up. Maybe the public transport during peak period is inadequate. I'm saying peak period, not off peak.
mm,
We say, okay, BMTC carries 3 million people, but I'm sure, if you look at it at a 7,000 bus or a 6,500 buses into 40 seater, it still only has a capacity of 25,000 people at
mm,
any given point of time, right? So you need various many mobility options. Even our metro, if we look at it, we can say
mm,
the
mm,
PPH is 40,000 in one direction, but when you look at metro during the peak period, at least at a peak hour, it's quite full, but off peak you may not find so many people. So you know that between, the morning peak of 3 hours and the evening peak of 3 hours is where you are going to be getting 30-40%, or maybe a little more than that, more people onto the roads, and onto those movement across the streets. And the remaining period you may not have as many people. So how are you going to distribute the load? Has and you can't keep building for peak. that's
Correct.
that's something that needs to be realized in, instituted in the system. We often have that 15-minute interval at junctions and look at, okay, what is the V by C ratio, the volume by
Mm.
capacity ratio for any junction, or for any road for that matter, and whether the throughput is actually, getting done, as in for whatever it is designed. Like I just mentioned, speed is a factor of many things. One,
Correct.
capacity. Two, obstructions. So you may have, in 2018, the World Bank had done one study where they said, Calcutta is the slowest city, but not the most congested. So
Mm.
there is a difference between congestion and, the slowness of a city. And it's not necessary that, everything that moves slow is bad for the city. I mean, you saw the recent congestion index says that London is the slowest moving city. They move at a 15 kilometer per hour speed. Despite London picking so many measures, from congestion tax to zero emission zones, to even inculcating walking cycling principles and building that beautiful infrastructure, and they still continue to sort of invest in the city's infrastructure, despite all these measures.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's no empirical formula as yet to
Mm.
sort of crack the mobility code. I would like to say it in that, in that
Sure.
manner. But we are
Mm.
all in that process of improving the city's mobility quotient. uh,
Mm.
and it's a lot of adaptation. So if you look at in today's context, we have metro, we have buses, based on certain, surveys that were done way back. It sort of also links very many important points within the city. But
Mm.
why are we not able to attain the ridership that was expected?
Mm.
That's a question that we also have to internalize. Are we marketing and communicating enough to our commuters? Are we selling, this mobility and the beautiful infrastructure, and getting people into buses, getting people into the public transport mode? What is their barrier for them to really come to these, use these systems? That's something that needs to be worked on. As I mentioned, we need this continuous investment in public transport, but we also need some sort of investment in marketing, communication, and internalizing this whole process, and getting people, nudging people to move to public transport. What often happens is, oh, public transport is seen as a slower mode. I need to reach office during the rush hour and in a faster pace. So do public transport have that thoroughfare to sort of move faster? Metro does, but then what happens even in metro's case is the last mile often takes much longer. In our city, Bangalore, which I think both of us love the city very very much, in whatever form it is now. It's still, I often wondered why we've never had, shared mobility options. You've seen, autos are probably the only other mode that you can see as a first and last mile. We
Correct.
had some sort of bike rental bikes. PPS is also very limited. But
Mm.
in Delhi, for example, you have these e-rickshaws, which,
Mm.
sort of moves around in the smaller lanes, by lanes of the city, and carries it. We're still looking at buses as a solution, as a first and last mile. We're still looking at autos as a solution,
Exactly.
and it's not very easy to find. For a
Mm.
city of 8.5, 9 million, people, we still have
11
only
now.
about a lakh and a half.
It's about 11 to 14 now. It's not 9 anymore.
I mean, I'm saying within the municipal region, we'll
Yeah.
probably have
Sure.
9 million, but we still have only about a million, 1.5 lakh autos. And how much are you going to be able to do in that? Government, well, it's trying to protect livelihood or
Mm.
protect some sort of thing in this process. But I've often mentioned this. Let the market forces take place. When you don't need a a permission or a permit to buy a car.
Mm,
Whether you have a parking or no parking, why do you need so many you've created so many hurdles for people to earn livelihood out of it. And there are probably systemic issues within our system, as to how they see or perceive different modes.
mm.
Often we've seen there is flare up
Yeah, I've seen
of,
that.
how they perceive bike taxis, for example. you know People feel threatened about it. But I think there is a market for everything, and there is a paying capacity for everybody. And there is no straight jacket approach, so it's not like one size fits all for everyone. So we have different needs at different times of the day, and we use different modes. And I think that needs to be sort of, again, internalized.
Sure. So there are a couple of interesting things here. We'll come back to the how the industry, and there are nuances in what you're saying about how we should permit, not permit. Why should the government be in the middle of all these things? Why not let the free market play in general? But I want to touch upon two more things that you said. One is we are not communicating the benefits of public transport well, right? That to me it stems from two things. One is probably go back to the way we measure any of these transport, this thing itself as a quantitative metric. You talked about two three things. You said PHPDT and V by C. So for the viewers, let's break it down. Vehicle to capacity ratio, which means how many vehicles can be carried at a particular junction or at a particular in a particular road. That is the capacity of the road or the junction and the number of vehicles. Now you see that numerator is vehicles. So we still focused on vehicles, and most usually these are defined as passenger car units, which are
Yeah.
basically, again, the word car comes into it. So it is very geared towards a specific way of measurement. And I think one of the things we should do is, why don't we call it people to capacity ratio?
Right.
Right, at least a signaling in the measurement will be little different. To use the right words, even if you're measuring the same thing. I know PCU has an adjustment for a bus or an adjustment for a bicycle, but the baseline is the car. But if you change the baseline and say we measure people will start looking at the measure slightly differently, and then the communication will also be different. You also talked about PHPDT per hour per direction. You introduced another PH in that, right? We should call that PH square PDT, which is peak hour, right? It's PHPDT now. So if you introduce the right words inside, maybe even in the technical jargon, people will start, even the students who learn these measurements will start understanding these, that oh, we need to measure people, we need to measure peak hour. We shouldn't be focusing on the vehicles alone, even though vehicles are ultimately the carriers of the people. Then you
Right.
can start looking at. So that's one point I think I wanted to kind of raise. And I think we should start working on some of those hard transportation metrics and the signaling they send out. But the second thing I wanted to touch upon was the, so that comes back to the speed measure. It's so attractive for people to say, it's very intuitive for people to say I'm going slower. So when you look at the, I refer to the TomTom congestion index which just came out, which said Bangalore is the second slowest city in the world, and you brought out a beautiful point. London is slow, but it is efficient. The buses carry more people than the trains, and the trains and the buses put together carry more people than the cars which are stuck on the road. Right? Nobody says in London I cannot get anywhere,
Mm.
even though you can claim that it is the slowest city. Nobody says, but that can't be the same of Bengaluru. We are slow and we are stuck because of the choice poverty. So I think the measure of the me- so this comes back to the question of what you guys are doing and what you have done and what you're talking about. What we're talking about today is, do you think the amount of metrics we are using to communicate these things, focusing on speed alone as a measure, which you said, how do you think we can change that? What kind of effort is required to broad base these measures, and what kind of measures do you think we should go after beyond speed? What are the
Sure.
typical examples you might be able to give me, that let's focus on this, let's focus on this, let's, no, 1 2 3 4, what could those be?
Like I just said, straight jacket approach may not help, but what I have, in the process of creating that ease of moving index, and when we looked at ease of moving, we were not just looking and measuring speed. We were looking at various mobility aspects. We talk about a lot on sustainable mobility, right? We say we need to encourage more pedestrian, more cycling. So in this process of doing it, we did about 3,700 surveys in Bangalore,
Mm, mm,
and we asked questions pertaining ease of crossing.
Mm.
crossing the roads, when you, or for that matter, ease of walking in the cities, whether you think the footpaths are wide enough across
Mm.
cities,
Mm.
across the city, and you are able to walk around it. Cycling, again, whether there
Mm.
is adequate cycling infrastructure. If I am also choosing to use public transport, whether there is enough parking for cycling at public transport infrastructure. you know these are like various questions that we asked the commuters. It sort of gave us so many mixed results, and also helped us to assess and analyze that what needs to be done, what should the city prioritize to get that desired yield of results. We've put in several crores of rupees today on the metro. We've put several crores of rupees on creating that signal free corridor. But like you said, it's moving vehicle over moving people. We are not measuring how many people are we moving across different
Mm.
points. So that metric probably hasn't really come. What you normally would do or could do is they have some occupancy ratio of the vehicle number, and you
Mm.
multiply that occupancy ratio with the throughput, like
Yeah.
we said, within when you get the classified data of any junction throughput, you'll be able to measure what is the quantum of people you've actually moved, what will be
Mm.
the throughput
Mm.
of the people. Again, like you said, neglection, or people neglect the movement of sorry, the transport planners neglect the movement of people here.
Mm.
That's a good question to ask here,
Mm.
because even when you're looking at crossing, you are looking whether it's possible to create a great separator and create more hurdle for a person to walk
Exactly.
and cross the road. And intuitively, somebody who's a elderly or person with disability, how do they access it? So even in
Yeah.
our survey, we try to capture that. We 5% of our survey respondents were persons with disability. We wanted to get insight from them as to how they perceive public transport, how they perceive even the roads and the overall infrastructure in the city. To come back to your question on solution, trying to figure out solution, there are some generic approaches we look at it. Strengthening, public transport
Mm.
is a key. We need to keep investing and continue to keep investing on public transport. From augmenting more public transport system to improving overall services. When I say overall services, I'm talking about coverage, availability, universal accessibility, safety, affordability, comfort, cleanliness, multiple factors that are virtues that enables and encourages. And that's what will help, more and more people to take pride in, shifting to public transport and telling that, okay, in Japan, this, people take
Yeah.
that pride in moving in public transport. So romanticizing public transport is again something that needs to come back. The paradox of mobility that I very quickly highlighted, the shortest distance taking the longest time and probably
Mm.
making it unaffordable overall. That is sort of very visible in the scene of Delhi. I'm giving you a little bit of Delhi example,
Sure,
probably
please
because
do.
I'm in that transition between Delhi and Bangalore all the time, and I see what doesn't work there and how it works here. They have 350 kilometers of metro.
Mm.
The variation in the ridership,
Mm.
is so much. It moves from 16 lakh people to about 50 lakh people, on a good day.
Wow.
So that's the kind of variation. On an average, they are at a 27, 28 lakh number. So when you start thinking about it, what is its yield,
Mm.
per passenger?
Per
What is that
passenger.
ticket size that you're taking? And metro doesn't give concession otherwise. I mean, for specific people, it gives concession if you use a cashless mode of payment. But besides it, it doesn't give any other concession. So why have we not worked on understanding why people are not using it? One. Two, also, if you look at it, what is it that is hampering that mobility or a movement of people into the system? So first and last mile connectivity is what I'm trying to talk about more so.
Yeah. Yeah.
That WRI and so many others have been working on this, particularly on first and last mile connectivity options. So do we have enough options? We briefly talked about it. What are your options? Micro mobility solution, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm only going to be traveling to 2 kilometer, 4 kilometer, whatever, short distance. And it cannot be more expensive than my metro ride itself, right? It
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be. So that's something that needs to be again internalized. How are you going to do it when you are going to have more mobility options created? You shared mobility options created.
Mm-hmm.
When you have accessibility of this whole shared mobility, where you're able to walk safely to your last mile and walk safely to your first mile, that's when you're going to encourage more and more people to shift to public
Mm-hmm.
transport, to move to public transport. And
That is
as
true.
we talked about it also, the investment on communication, which is,
Mm.
I still don't know how do I reach. It says 5 minute, 10 minute, ETA, estimated time, but traffic jams are such. You've seen it, when people get stuck in Marathali and they are at that bridge, or at that Kunali junction specifically. It's just like a kilometer and a half, and it takes 40 minutes, sometimes hours. Okay, now how do we improve that? How do you
Mm.
get people to at least walk that? Can you pedestrianize that place? Think about various
Yeah, yeah.
rational solutions that will help people to move. And that's something that also needs to be brought in. The second point is on policy interventions.
Mm-hmm.
We recently, the BMLTA bill thankfully got passed. It took such a long fight, but let's see how BMLTA finally results into improving mobility in the city. And you know that without financial strength, it will never
Mm.
happen. It cannot happen. So a very comprehensive approach on policy also is required, whether it is with relation to TOD, whether it is in relation with parking. If you're going to be making parking more expensive, people will say it's easier to move by public transport, but you can't. It's often treated as a word bank. It is often treated as a public good in the minds of the
Mm.
the car owners, at least, or the vehicle owners, at least. So that's where sort of thought process has to change. The other area, like I said, in the ease of moving, is also looking at ease of doing mobility related business. I
Mm.
also briefly mentioned to you that you have a cap on the auto rickshaw permit. You don't have mediums of shared auto or shared mobility options as such. So you've created internally a lot of barriers without realizing that you've created these barriers. So how are you going to unlock this overall mobility? That's something also needs to be done. Again, how do you inform this? Is through data, right?
Mm.
How you're going to inform the overall scheme of mobility is through data. So if you know that there is so much of throughput happening at the metro station, because you have these CCTV cameras, and CCTV cameras are just not for surveillance, right? You
Mm.
are supposed to unpack that data and try and use it. That at what hours is it? How people mobilize, and basis which you have to start making decisions, rational decisions in this process. Another area which I think we spoke about was continuous investment in the infrastructure, more
Mm.
so digital infrastructure. And in the recent past, the central government also talked about municipal bonds, getting more private investments into the city. Uh, and how are you going to have that private investment? That's something also needs to be brought in, which is why I said, reducing that barrier for mobility entrepreneurs to create that thriving mobility ecosystem by streamlining overall mobility related policies. That's something
Mm-hmm.
that also will have to be in adoption of technology. You may or may not agree, but a large percentage, over 90% of people have a smartphone today. And smartphone is that mini computer in our hands today, that you can use for taking a lot of our decisions, from cashless payments to even using that data to sort of move, that encouragement of ridership, because you can do your communication marketing to do that. uh, and again, digitization of this data. So we're still talking about JTFS systems for our public bus transport or public transport systems. It's still going to be static, may not be as dynamic. There are reservations when it comes to looking at that data. We still have not probably thought about a digitization of parking, or holistic parking. There is a gap between enforcement, the enforcement
Mm,
agency, that
mm,
is the traffic police, to even see that how could I use, I mean, how could we coordinate with the municipal corporation. uh, Not that we want to fine people, but that educating people that you can't park anywhere and everywhere. That's also sort of is a missing act. And if you digitize that whole infrastructure, that you could go and park in so and so location, or book parking in so and so location, you have to pay a price because you are traveling in a personal vehicle. That will help and change things. So catalyzing this whole innovation and amplifying information is
mm,
something that needs to be done to sort of create that change. Another very short point we are seeing is that transition from
mm.
ice to electric, right?
Right, right.
So acceleration is happening by virtue of what today? Okay, subsidy primarily.
Yeah.
But you know what interesting step another city like Chandigarh has done
Mm,
is they've capped the number of ICE vehicle registration. Okay, any financial year they are going to only have this many registration, and it's going to only reduce by the year. So that's something which is an interesting phenomena. If I want to move and I want to buy a vehicle, I cannot buy ICE vehicle beyond and anyway it's phasing out, right? We are
mm.
looking to phase that out. So that transition also needs to be sort of brought in through a policy change.
Just let's jump into. I wanted to get into the data and the surveys part, but let's jump into the
Sure.
permits and the bonds and the private investment, because today I feel that some of the corporations' finances are not good enough for bonds. Their ratings are very low, so even if they jump in, they get bad deals. And interest-free loans is something they are looking at, or low-interest loans from the World Bank types is what they are looking to do for heavy infrastructure, but not for vehicular operational stuff. They
Right.
are not. So there is a reason for that. But let's look at private investment in transport itself. Maybe not necessarily transport infrastructure, the hard infrastructure of roads and bridges and tracks and lanes and other things. But if you look at private investment, the unit economics is why all of these are failing. Right? It brings back to the question. Let's say the public bicycle sharing is coming in, or last mile modes are coming in. Uh, it's challenging. It's challenging. You're burning a lot for quite a while, right? And the behavior needs to change enough to say that's an acceptable mode. The form factor familiarity is not there. You put a bicycle out there and people haven't even ridden a bicycle. So I had to go backwards and start training schools, right? It's the pedal chalet program that we did was to say, let's do to cycles what motor vehicle training schools did for motor vehicles. So then you're having to go backwards and touch that part and make that something, so that tomorrow when you lay your hands and you see a bicycle, or a smaller mobility mode, which is a micro mobility mode, you're not afraid of it, and you're familiar with it, and you're not thinking of, I don't know this animal, how do I use it, right? So there is a lot of things that are going on in that space. But permit itself, look at it this way, I understand the nuances. We have to allow more players to get into these spaces. It cannot all be done by the government. At the same time, there are externalities of every particular mode that comes in, and competition on the roads are good, but it has to be done in a way that it is organized and doesn't cause too many problems. And I don't think, see, look, we don't even have a transport regulator. PMLT is the one which is just coming, and by the time it scales up and starts doing all these things, it may need a little bit of capacity and handholding. And when then you start understanding how do you regulate, because the transport department right now, I should say frankly that they are not built for anything other than licensing. They are just not. They're just putting too many hurdles. You said that ease of business thing. It is. Uh, I would say transport department is the single-handed culprit in all of this ease of business thing. Urban planning or urban development department might be slightly better off, and unless we reform the transport department and start putting clear people and not treat it like money bags, and if the political class cannot understand that they are the culprit here, I think we are on the we are on the wrong road, and we need to reform that particular organization first. Even though they might show interest here and there, when it comes to actually putting the permits on the road or understanding, they are not doing it from calculating the externality and stepping in when there is a market failure. They're just saying everything is a permit. It's still working on the license, Raj. And I agree with you when you say broadly that we should allow everybody to play without all these license and permits. But there are ways of, like, the PBS permit is just a pure application, right? It is only saying, can you contribute a little bit for some infrastructure? Whether that happens or not, we can hold them accountable later. But it's saying, okay, 50 rupees per whatever can you additionally give, and you take the permit. We are not saying get it a license. So that's
Right.
there's a clear distinction between some of the newer age permits that are coming in versus the old monolith of the transport department. And I'm not hesitant in using
So
putting blame where it lies. So now I think it's a road that like you said, we need to travel on, and we are almost there. Some progressive officers are there, but not in the transport department. I can tell you for sure, they never put the right people in that place for anybody. Anybody is good. So where do you see the collaboration between these private operators themselves, right? Which is, that brings me to the other question of data, but let's answer it this way, because sharing of resources, data among private operators between a taxi, auto, and the bus and the metro and whoever else comes on board, how do we make them work seamlessly, in your opinion? Is it about data? Is it about technology? Is it about their willingness to sit on the table and get together? Have you seen examples of places where seamless mobility can happen if they come together? Otherwise, they are operating in silos. Everybody is a competitor to each other, right? He will eat my customer, I will eat your customer. Nobody eats anybody. You need multiple modes to switch around, right? You talked about last mile. Last mile to the metro is more problem because that animal is there and we have to feed that animal. Metro doesn't come everywhere, whereas the bus last mile could just be a walk. If you do the spread often enough, you don't need to consider 100 different modes for the bus. You just walk to the bus. 500 meters, you can walk to the bus. It's more flexible. But I can understand you can't have only bus. You'll have metro, you'll have suburban rail for carrying different distances and different people. But how are these people integrating, in your opinion? What have you seen out there? Are there still hesitancies in sharing things between themselves? Is there a unified way of sitting together and doing all these conversations, or is it not mature enough for that yet?
I'm hoping BMLT will do that. you know,
Yeah.
uh, that is the first thing that I think BMLTA should also look at it.
Mhm.
Bring all the transport service providers on the symbol on the table. Start telling, share your data.
Mhm.
I'll just briefly tell you when Dr. Ekrup Kaur was the CMD. I had worked very closely with BMTC during my WRI days, and uh, I asked them, you were running bus services. Do you even know what is the ridership and when that ridership peaks? They're like, no. We just, we've never asked the BMRCL. So then I personally sat with the then uh, the chief traffic manager, Mr. Renukeshwar. We
Mhm.
typed out a letter sent to BMRCL asking them, can you give us hour by hour, week by week data on when, what is your ridership every hour at
Mhm.
different metro stations,
Mhm.
right? That's when you start at least communicating between each other. You are playing the role of first and last mile, but you don't know, you have no visibility of what is the quantum of people that are coming out. That's one. Second, where are these people going? How are you supposed to know where are these people going so that you can create those routes, necessary routes? So that is also very intuitive. Okay, we know these are like high footfall areas, and then brought it up, that okay, this is where you should be looking at buses. You'll be surprised to see in the morning peak, this is before the Whitefield line got built. Bayapanhalli had more people going into the city than people coming out onto Bayapanhalli towards, Whitefield.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, so BMTC had all the buses
Going
lined up
out?
to go to Whitefield,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
they
I
had more
remember that.
people. Yeah, so that was quite a surprise, for us also. But I'm just trying to tell you this that, if you don't communicate, you are not going to have efficiency and reliability. This is one of our parameter also. We tried asking a lot of questions, we didn't get as many answers. But I think when you start communicating and putting that data between the two places, first is what you want. What is the data that you want. Second is, how are you going to use that data to improve your efficiency and overall mobility efficiency for the city. This is where it will result into a into a, a more utopian mobility scenario. uh, and I mean,
For
that's
yeah.
that's the basis of it, and data only drives all this. uh, what's another interesting thing that you'll come out with is the flow changes overall every day, and it
Mm-hmm.
also changes by the hour. Like I said, peak period you'll have a different need, and off peak you'll have a different need. Do you need to run your entire capacity, and how you should distribute the load during off peak? How are you going to attract more commuters? That's again
Mm-hmm.
something that needs to be thought about. And you can't have, like, one approach that and again, you have to be viable also in your approach, right? So that's where you start seeing that the new mobility options have the surge pricing, you
Mm-hmm.
know which sort of changes the dynamics, because naturally, when the demand is higher than the supply, you are going to be paying a premium to move, ideally. So similar aspects and things need to be brought in here. It still has to be cheaper than you using public, private vehicle. And
Yeah, that's
often
the biggest
you
thing.
in Delhi, what we noticed also was, you know Delhi and NCR as a whole,
Mm.
you have barriers to enter. At least the shared mobility have barriers to enter the Delhi area, which is your toll price that
Mm.
you pay.
Mm.
You know, so in addition to that, what you'll notice is that all the vehicles run on CNG or electric, the
Mm.
shared
Mm.
mobility
Mm.
options over there. And unlike Bangalore, where we're still using diesel cabs, over there, I think the air pollution scenario is high. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reason why they've converted every uh, shared mobility option to electric or CNG. Yet you have to pay a toll to enter Delhi, and it's the toll is only for the shared mobility option, the commercial vehicle, not for a private vehicle. So it made the cost of commute using a shared mobility costlier, and so much so that the private guy feels that it is cheaper to go by private vehicle than a shared mobility option, or
Correct.
cheaper or equal. I'm just saying
Equal. Yeah.
that's the problem. That's where, mobile I mean, the decision making has to be more holistic. And it also is a barrier for the mobility entrepreneur, because he has to pay that toll price not knowing, whether he'll be reaping the benefit of it, in the process. So I think somewhere in the previous budget also, I'm saying the general budget, 2021 22 and the 22-23, talked about public transport related taxation. And
Mm.
that also needs to be brought in place, that, how to sort of reduce that, how to sort of bring in more holistic planning approach. This is where I said, there's so many moving parts and there is no empirical method to solve it. But I think the priorities and prioritization has to be done, and you should be able to measure. Unless you are able to measure it, you're not going to be
Correct.
able to change things. Keeping that in mind, like you also talked about, 50 rupees on the cycling infrastructure.
Mm.
When a PBS operator is also coming into play and trying to promote bicycling. Today you have the O&M contracts, right? You've seen the example of Trin.
Yeah.
Now Trin has become a synonym for Mysuru in a way. What has happened is that, yes, you have a dock bicycle system, so that has caused a little barrier in when a person has to use it, considering that, I have to find a docking station, put it, and then, my last mile is still going to be a walk, or I don't, women may not feel it comfortable. uh, I think there are some exceptions that have been made in the recent past, but nevertheless, I'm saying
It's moved
these,
dockless now. It's become dockless.
yeah,
The
and
new.
it's
Yeah.
government funded in a way, right? Like it's funded
It
in,
was, but there are still challenges into how you do. So there are, so that's a different conversation on how capex funding needs to be done for these kind of
yes,
modes. Who pays
yes,
the bill for these? If it is socially good, how do you say this is socially good and this is not, and how do you do that? And it's also last mile is always an extension for public transport. So
correct.
should the public transport operators start taking more interest in last mile? So there are so many issues that are there. But I want to come back to one useful thing at this point in time is you wrote a letter from one department to another asking for data, right? And you do surveys for your reports that you've done. Lots of agencies are doing surveys again and again and again to be able to get the same data back. Writing letters is not the way you're supposed to be sharing data. You talked about cameras, they are automatically there with data. Every image that is going through is a potential recognition. Of course, we'll talk about surveillance state later, but using data at an anonymized level, using technology to build data sources that talked about GTFS, where do you see the where in this whole country, wherever you worked in the two three places that you have and known, do you see any best practices on data collection first, holding the data, opening it up, disseminating it, allowing people to access, priced or otherwise, restrictions
Yeah.
or otherwise? Do you see the maturity? How do you see the maturity of, on one side, the public transport operators who are predominantly state owned, and on the other side, uh, private guys who have the data, but there are constraints in sharing? Where do you see
So,
data collection, dissemination, storage, availability to people like yourself and others to do research around it or do analytics around it or themselves to do analytics around it?
so you saw that TFL opened, 80 different feeds of data. You had, unlocking of huge value in that process of opening their data sets. When I say unlocking, the Deloitte report in 2017 estimated 130 million pounds of
Pounds.
worth of data,
So,
worth of value unlocking that has happened in this process. And that's a good way to sort of even look at how it has sort of what kind of economic impact it has had. you know it's improved journeys, it saved people time, it supported innovation and also created jobs. Today, if you look at TFL, with the use of that data, there are 600 different applications. TFL themselves have only few applications, but mobile applications, when I say application, and there are over 13,000 developers, and 42% of the London uses these applications today. And this is only talking about this data is 2017. Today we are sitting in 2023. I'm sure it's only multiplied many folds now. When we start evaluating how this value unlocking happens, you will start seeing that only when you have that overall holistic thought process around it, without which it may not fructify,
hmm,
because you can't promote two different things at the same time and then expect that people will let people have that choice of choosing whichever is easier mode. You have almost 22 to 25% of land use under road in a city like Delhi. So you have nice wide roads, right? And you're continuing to keep building roads. Great, that's a good option. But you also continue to build public transport infrastructure. So you've given so many signals, and like I said, because your mobility needs are different.
hmm,
When you say different, it's during the peak that you are having more commute than off peak. That, if you are able to balance it, you know is going to help more and more people to commute faster. If you're seeing that you're still stuck in a traffic jam and you're continuing to keep building flyovers, instead you should start thinking about providing a green mobility option, like a in electric mobility or a cycle lanes. You often see that Delhi doesn't score well when it comes to cycling and walking. So it's too hot at times, or it is too cold. Weather is just one of those excuse not to do it. And they say, oh, Bangalore is conducive for cycling, and I completely agree. But Bangalore also has uh, rains almost every for 6 months in a year. But I think that's never been an excuse for us to really not pick it up. So in in short, what I'm trying to tell is that you have to, what drives these things is, unless you start counting how many people are you moving and how you are moving, you're not going to be prioritizing specific mobility options, and you're not going to be yielding that desired result. There is this mantra in WRI that we used to use: count it, change it, and scale it. you
hmm,
know so counting we are having counts at different places, probably not in an integrated manner. And that change is going to be driven only when you are going to be able to count this and look at it, look at the whole mobility scenario through that data, and then trying to scale it. Our experiment at the Church Street, you
Mm.
pedestrianized it. We saw different results there. Businesses thriving, people enjoying public realm. Why can't we start doing it at the very many commercial street and the Brigade Road? We're still
Mm.
having motor vehicle passing, and it's still inconvenient to cross at times. you
True.
know so I'm just trying to tell, a change starts from small, and if that change is beautiful and loved by people, it should be scaled further. It
Absolutely.
will get that backing from the people, and you will start seeing that things evolving over a period of time. One more thing that I wanted to highlight here very, very quickly, and I saw this in a very small city like Bijnor in UP,
Mm.
is that you had bicycle graveyards after
Really?
COVID.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and they just picked it up, revived it, modified that those bicycles, and it was allowed to be rented. I think I shared it with you at one point, but I'm saying this is something I'm sure there are a lot of unutilized bicycles that is there.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't, when I'm not using it, can I rent it? Will I
yeah.
be assured that I'll get back my bicycle at any given point? This is again some trigger that can start. You've seen it with the rental bikes. You will start seeing it hopefully with the rental cycles, and
Mm.
things will change thereafter, I hope.
So, on that good note, two things. One is we haven't been able to ride together. We've been missing each other. You've been in Delhi and back and forth. So, you should get back on the bicycle and do that ride that we both have been missing. Cycle of life stuff. And second thing is, thank you very much for sharing all this. And I hope we will be able to make more progress on the data sharing side in the coming days. And I'm hoping transport regulators are formed in more states and they are empowered quickly enough to come to action and start looking at prioritizing the integration of these multiple modes, sitting on them all together and understanding where are the challenges and what these are. I think that on the physical transportation side and on the mobility side, qualitative metrics need to be more and more available, published, and we need to start understanding how people feel. Of course, everybody is feeling frustrated on some side, but there are subsets of people who are able to today commute in certain modes, and they can suggest certain incremental improvements, and we need to start making this seamless integration work. Last mile is an issue, especially for fixed line modes, mainline modes like trains. More number of buses, more reach, all of those things are there. But more importantly, for a static plan like the master plan, other plans that are coming up, mobility plans which need to feed into those or take things from those, both ways, the availability of data, the availability of shared accessible data becomes very important. And thank you for doing all the work around this. And thanks for being on the show, Roshan.
Thank you, Satya. Thanks. It's great opportunity. I think 1 hour is inadequate to summarize everything that
I
is
think so.
happening in our mobility stream and the various data points. But I think I've tried to give as much of our, bits and pieces of information and where it can lead to. I'm hoping, once BMLTA comes into force full-fledgedly, and get every stakeholder, in service provider onto the table, things will change for better
I
in
think so.
in our city, and I think Bangalore will be again that garden city that we all love to be in.
Yeah. On that note, thank you very much, Roshan.
Thanks, Satya.